Hi, everybody. We are wrapping up 1.4. So we're just hitting the rest of 1.4 that's on the CED. We've learned all the parts of the brain that we need to know in AP psychology, and then there's a few other vocab words that we need to master involving brain plasticity and specialization, and then two types of brain scans. So here we go. Brain plasticity and specialization. We're calling it 1.4b. Plasticity. So plastic means to mold in ancient Greek. It just means shapeable, bendable, easy to shape and bend. And our brains are plastic in that they can grow and shrink, right? We can grow different parts of our brain just like a muscle. For example, if you speak two languages instead of one language, there's a good chance that your hippocampus is denser and larger than somebody that only speaks one language. There's a correlation between speaking languages and having a bigger hippocampus, or driving a taxi cab and having a bigger hippocampus, for example. Right? So every time you learn something, there are more neural connections that are made, and more neural connections equals more density and growth, neurogenesis in your brain. So plasticity means your brain can grow, right? You can shape and grow parts of your brain just like a muscle. And you can also lose density and shrink parts of your brain, just like if you don't use your muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it, and the brain is no different. Split brain research. Okay, I think we're going to take a closer look at this in class. There's guaranteed to be a question just like this on the AP exam. I promise it's coming. There's going to be a question about key and ring, and it's really complicated. Most students don't get this question right. So let's take a moment to figure this out. So previously we've learned that the corpus callosum is this thing in the middle, okay? And it separates the left hemisphere from the right hemisphere of the brain. And when you sever the corpus callosum, this middle part, you essentially have two brains inside your body, and they can no longer communicate because the corpus callosum is gone. They can't communicate. But they have different goals and different abilities, and they can operate at the same time. Another thing to note about the brain is that the left hemisphere of your brain controls the entire right side of your body, right? It controls your right eye, but it also controls like your right hand and your right leg and your right shoulder and everything on the right side. And the right hemisphere of your body controls everything on the left side of your body. Okay, so in the past, scientists have used and neuroscientists have used a variety of ways to cure people of certain disorders. And there's a certain disorder called epilepsy, where people have uncontrollable seizures for no reason. The reason being, we think, is abnormal electrical activity spreading between the two hemispheres. Right? There's misfiring going on, which is what causes people to have seizures. So doctors somehow found a cure to epilepsy, which is to sever the corpus callosum so that the two hemispheres can no longer communicate. Now, something incredible happens to these people who have their corpus callosum severed. First of all, their epilepsy is cured. They no longer have seizures because there's no longer misfiring between the hemispheres. However, they are excellent research subjects because we can figure out which hemisphere specializes in what. Okay, so here's a famous study that was done on epilepsy patients, and there is guaranteed to be this question on the AP exam. I promise it'll be there. At least one multiple choice question will be here. In the picture of keys and rings, all right, we got key, we got the word key, and we got the word ring here. If the image, let's pretend, the corpus callosum is severed. Okay, this is, blocked. So the right eye is seeing this, but it can't communicate what it sees to the left hemisphere because it's severed, right? And the left eye sees key, but it can't communicate to the right hemisphere because the corpus callosum is severed, okay? In the picture of keys and rings, if the image is presented to the left visual field, which is processed by the right hemisphere, a split brain patient may have difficulty verbally identifying what they see. However, they can use their left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, to accurately select the corresponding object, keys. This happens because the left hand is controlled by the hemisphere that directly processes the visual information. Conversely, if the image is presented to the right visual field, processed by the left hemisphere, the patient can verbally identify the object, rings, but may struggle to select it with their right hand because their right hand is controlled by their left hemisphere. Yes, yeah. So we'll look at a couple of examples of this in class, but we need to know about split brain research and how this study in particular operates, but we'll look at a couple of different sample studies. But try some practice problems with split brain research and the key and ring phenomenon, because I promise it'll be there in May. We'll cover it. We'll watch this video in class and cover a few more example questions. So contralateral hemispheric organization just means that we're cross-wired, right? So my right hemisphere controls the left side of my body, and my left hemisphere controls the right side of my body. That's just called contralateral hemispheric organization. Now, there's also something called hemispheric specialization, which means that our left brain specializes in some things more than the right brain, and the right brain specializes in some things more than the left brain. So for a long time in psychology and pop psychology, people would say they're left-brained or right-brained, and there's a little bit of, you know, there's no real scientific evidence that people are either left-brained or right-brained. It doesn't make sense. We're all both left and right-brained. However, your left brain specializes in something and your right brain specializes in something. So the best example that we have is language processing and language ability. So language processing is done in your left hemisphere because a certain thing called the Broca's area is in your left hemisphere, and something called Wernicke's area is in your left hemisphere. It's just one part of the brain. These two parts of the brain that we haven't learned yet, but you need to know them. They're in your left hemisphere. They're not in your right hemisphere. So anything to do with language is in your left hemisphere. So that's one example of hemispheric specialization, is that our left hemisphere specializes in language, where our right hemisphere is more focused on spatial awareness and motor control. Spatial awareness and motor control, so anything physical. We call it language, and then like movement. Linguistic processing is understanding language, right? Linguistic processing is just understanding language. And it turns out that our brains are designed to learn language. We have an innate ability to learn and pick up language. All humans have a language. It's a complex cognitive process involved in understanding and producing language. So there are two brain parts that we need to know. Broca's area, right here. It's in the left hemisphere, in the frontal lobe, kind of in the back of the frontal lobe, and it's responsible for speech production. So the way that I remember this is Broca produce, language production. So this is the thing that helps you produce language and speak. It plays this crucial role in the formation of grammatically correct sentences and the coordination of muscles involved in speech. Broca produce speech, left hemisphere. Broca's aphasia is a disorder caused by damage to the Broca's area in the left hemisphere of the brain, often resulting from a stroke or a brain injury. And someone with Broca's aphasia can no longer produce speech, BroPro. They have difficulty producing fluent speech and forming correct sentences. Their speech may be slow, effortful, and characterized by shortened phrases or words. So a very old person that has had a stroke or some other type of brain injury, if they can't speak well anymore, that means they have Broca's aphasia. They have trouble producing speech. All right, and then the other part of the brain that we have to know here is called Wernicke's area. Yeah, it's German, so it's a V. Wernicke's area. It's a region located in the left hemisphere of the brain. Again, hemispheric specialization. Hello. Specifically in the temporal lobe. Remember, temporal is related to sound. It's involved in language comprehension, so understanding language. Temporal lobe, auditory, understanding language, understanding spoken and written language. It helps to interpret the meaning of words and sentences, allowing individuals to comprehend and process language. So just remember Broca's area produces speech, Wernicke's area comprehends speech, understands spoken and written words. And surprise, there's also Wernicke's aphasia, a language disorder caused by damage to Wernicke's area. Did I say Broca's aphasia? No, I said Wernicke's aphasia, a language disorder caused by damage to Wernicke's area in the left hemisphere of the brain, again from stroke or other brain injury. And someone with Wernicke's aphasia will have difficulty understanding spoken and written language. So they can speak, right? Their Broca's area is fine. They can still speak fine, but they can't understand speech. They may use nonsensical, inappropriate words or sentences, making communication challenging. Okay, you can look at this guy who has Wernicke's aphasia. Just take a look at that in class. Then we need to know 2 brain scans. We used to have to know 5 brain scans, but they made it easy for us, folks. We only have to know 2 brain scans, and they're pretty easy. EEG, that's this futuristic or not futuristic. I mean, this is kind of one of the older types of brain scans, actually. It's old. but it looks futuristic still, is when they put all these little like plastic cup nodes on somebody's head. You see it in the movies, you see it in Stranger Things. It's a non-invasive neuroimaging technique used to record electrical activity in the brain. So they're just measuring electrical activity and they're seeing, if some parts of the brain have more electrical activity than other parts of the brain, right? When you read a book or watch a movie or talk about someone you love or talk about someone you hate, different parts of your brain will light up or have more electrical activity than others. And they measure this and they do experiments with this with an EEG. It's measuring electricity, right? Your neurons fire electricity through themselves, and that is what this is measuring. It's seeing which neurons in which part of your brain are lighting up when you're doing a certain task, EEG. So, I mean, it's pretty easy to remember E stands for electricity because this is the only one that's measuring electricity in your brain. Okay, and it's good for measuring sleep and sleep stages. This is the next topic that we'll talk about. All right, fMRI is the second brain scan that you have to know. And this is not measuring electricity. It is measuring brain activity by detecting changes in blood flow and oxygen levels. So not electricity, blood and oxygen, because same thing when you do different tasks. Let's say you're playing a video game while you're in an fMRI. While you're playing that game, scientists are looking at changes in blood flow to different parts of your brain and oxygen levels to different parts of your brain. And that can tell them more than just electricity. It provides detailed images of the brain's structure and function. So that's another thing that the EEG doesn't do. It doesn't have this nice structure of a brain, but an fMRI is a 3D image of your brain lit up on some guy's computer, and they can see where activity is taking place while you're doing a certain task. It's called a fMRI because F stands for functional. It means that they can look at your brain while you're doing something. So there's just an MRI, right? Maybe if you broke an ankle or you broke a hand at one point, or you have a ligament tear, you probably got an MRI. An MRI is just a straight image, flat image, but a functional MRI is they can see you during a certain task. So they can look at your brain activity while you're doing something, a functional MRI. Just like that. So they can see blood flow and oxygen flow changes while you're doing a certain task, and they can make conclusions based on what they find. All right, and then the final term, I believe, is lesioning. Lesioning is the oldest method in psychology to, cure somebody of some ailment. They would remove a part of your brain. So they like dig in there and remove part of your brain. It's useful to do in mice because mice are something like 95% genetically the same as humans. And we can experiment by cutting out a small piece of their brain and seeing how their personality or behavior changes. And then we can make conclusions like, oh, that part of the brain must be related to memory, and that part of the brain must be related to happiness or anger or aggression. This is how we learn about specialized functions in the brain and how each different part has a different purpose. Lesioning is just cutting a piece of it out. That is a wrap. Thank you for listening. We'll learn more in class, hopefully, and I'll see you all then. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.